Good evening and welcome to all of our viewers. I'm so happy to have you all here. This is going to be another one of our Uncle Bobbie's fantastic author events. So thank you all for showing up. We're here tonight for what I know is going to be a fascinating, important, and engaging discussion. We have author Rachel Ricketts here to share her book with us, Do Better, Spiritual Activism for Fighting and Healing from White Supremacy. I'm really excited to get into it. But first, some housekeeping rules. As you know, there will be a live audience Q&A directly to following the conversation. You can submit your questions using the Ask a Question module over the course of the conversation. Do Better was released last week, and if you haven't gotten your copy yet, thank you. You can do so by clicking the green button at the bottom of the screen, and it will take you directly to our Uncle Bobbie's online bookshop. If you find yourself in Philly, you can come on over to Germantown and get a copy at Uncle Bobbie's. Okay, let's jump right into it. Moderating this evening, we have a trilingual facilitator, educator, activist, researcher, and they are also the founder and managing director of the McKensie Mack Group. Let's give a warm welcome to McKensie Mack. Got you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, McKensie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Okay. Now, please join me in welcoming our featured author. She is a queer, multiracial Black woman, a global thought leader, racial justice educator, healer, speaker, and writer. She hosts intersectional racial justice workshops worldwide, including her own spiritual activism series. She cultivates change by fusing her experiences as an attorney, trained anti-racism educator, and grief coach with her spiritual certifications in breathwork, yoga, mindfulness, and Reiki. She was named one of Well and Good's 2020 Changemakers and has been featured in international media such as the New York Times, Cosmopolitan, Goop, and The Atlantic. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Rachel Ricketts. Hello, Rachel.
Hi.
Thank you both so much for being here. I'm really happy to have you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
All right. I'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, McKensie.
Finally, we're here.
Yay.
Finally, we're here. I know that before we sort of get into the discussion, and I want everybody to know who's watching right now, that we're going to discuss for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to go to Q&A. So you will have an opportunity to get some of your questions answered. But before we do anything else, I know that Rachel, you talked about leading us off with the land acknowledgement. So I'm wondering if you'd like to begin there.
Yeah, please. And thank you. I had the pleasure and honor of kicking off my last event with a phenomenal Afro-Indigenous artist named Malaika Wary. And she led us through a land back acknowledgement, which is now what I'm going to call all of these, because that is precisely what they should be.
Yeah.
So land back acknowledgement is an opportunity and an offering for us to just take a moment to give thanks for the Indigenous stewards of the lands upon which we all live, work, play, reside. For the majority of us, we live, work, play, reside on stolen lands that are not Indigenous to us or our ancestors or our peoples. I want to give thanks to the Nuu-chah Nation as the Indigenous stewards of the land upon which I currently reside. I want to give thanks to the Potawatomi, the Miamia, and the Illinois for being the Indigenous stewards on the lands upon which McKensie lives, works, and resides, and the Lenape peoples for being the Indigenous stewards of the area now known as Philadelphia. And in us giving honor to those Indigenous folks, those Indigenous nations, I just want us to take a moment to not only honor them by saying their names, but honor them by taking stock and taking a moment to reflect on our connection with the land. What is our connection with the land? What is our connection and understanding and acknowledgement of being on stolen land. And what is our connection, acknowledgement, and understanding of our ancestors' interaction with these lands. And to make this a land acknowledgement, for all of us to call ourselves forth into action, into making sure that we are supporting those Indigenous folks who were the original stewards of the land that we live, work, and play on. So giving thanks to them, giving thanks to the land, acknowledging and honoring our connection with the land as beings, and just taking a moment to give gratitude for being able to come together in this virtual space.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So land back acknowledgement. Thank you so much for sharing that. I am going to definitely ask you how you are, but I will say before I do that, that's one of the things that I love about you, is that you have this way of bringing your awareness into a space in a way that is so grounding. And every time that I've been on a call with you, even when I felt like I was grounded before I got on the call, you took me to depths that I thought, wow, I thought I felt grounded. And now that I'm on this call and I'm hearing Rachel speak, I feel even more grounded than I did before. And I feel even more visible to myself. And I think that is one of your powers that you bring into a space. So I thank you for starting in such an honorable way, and starting in such an aware way. I thank Avisa as well for already going into your bio, which is great, because I know we just have 45 minutes to share together today. Okay. And which I would love. And so I think, I want to start off by talking to the folks about why we are here, right? So this is a virtual book launch, and we're talking about this book right here, which is Do Better. I hope everybody can see that. Spiritual Activism for Fighting and Healing from White Supremacy. And so before we get into talking about, the ways in which we are connected, the ways in which we know each other, Rachel, I first want to ask you, how are you feeling?
Thank you. And I want to take a moment of appreciation for you, because I feel the same way about feeling additionally grounded whenever we are on calls, and always taking a moment to start any of our calls, whether they're personal or professional, with that question. Yeah. Of how are you actually doing? Because it enters all of our spaces.
It really does.
So, thank you for that. I'm so excited to be here in conversation with you. And, before we started this, they're asking how have these events been going? I'm like, they're great, but they're also weird because I'm on my bed. And there's so much excitement and joy and celebration and pride in being able to actually hold this book and share it with the world. And doing it in this together but distant way also produces a lot of grief. So it's weird, when we all click end at the end of this, and I'm so excited, and all I want to do is go for a meal and a bite and a champagne clink with you, McKensie, and it's just okay, bye. I'm just gonna go upstairs and make dinner, I guess. I don't know. I just want to acknowledge that, I feel conflicting feelings. I feel joy and pride and celebration, and I feel deep grief and loss, because these are trying times that we're in.
Yeah, they really are. Yeah. I feel that's similar, sort of what you've shared around the grief of that, in that you get for a moment to be able to engage in the celebration. And then before you know it, it's like you said, it's time to click out of your browser, right? So I definitely share that feeling for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. How are you?
You know what? I am feeling, I'm feeling so many emotions at one time. I feel so excited for you and so excited for this book. This is your baby, but you know how they say it takes a village to raise a child. It's you did all this work, you did all this labor, you pushed this book out. And yet I still also feel this sort of a sense of pride, as if it is my baby,
You doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel I could be auntie. Auntie X. So I feel really proud, and I feel grounded, and I also feel excited for the discussion that we're about to have.
Me too.
And thank you for asking. So let's begin by talking about how we know each other. And let's talk about how we work together on this book. So I remember, I literally down to like the moment that I received your email when you reached out to me initially and you said, hey, I'm looking for an anti-oppression editor on this book. Can we work together? And I remember at the time too that you said something along the lines of, I am on the Radical Copy newsletter, which is Radical Copy is a business that I'm the CEO of and founder of. And I read that email, and when I saw that you said that you're on our newsletter, I was just like, oh my God, and I feel really honored by that. But then also, I thought, okay, this already feels and sounds like an amazing project that I definitely want to be working on. So, which I want to sort of shout out as well, that I didn't do that editing alone, but I did it with my lovely colleague, Vita Cleveland. So shout out to Vita. Thank you so much, Vita, for all the work that you did with us on this. But a question I want to ask you is, what did you learn from the process of anti-oppression editing that we took on your book?
Yeah, I want to answer that. But first, I want to say what's coming up for me as you say that is I also remember looking for this person who's going to be the right person, right? You don't pick any doula off the street for your book, baby, especially your first book, baby. And I had consulted with somebody else a little bit, an Indigenous writer to potentially do this work, and then found that it just didn't feel fully aligned. And then I think shortly after that, I got this email from Radical Copy that like, we're opening up this, the McKensie Mack group, this side of things, and this is what we're up to. And I was like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. It had been on my radar already, and I think I was going to ask if you could, or if this was work that you were doing, and then that email landed in my inbox, which is part of me. For me, my spiritual connection, part of my spiritual activism is like, that's how these things work, right? When you set that intention and get clear with your energy, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
Boundaries, then the universe can work in your favor and be like, here you go. And so that's what that felt like. And from our first conversation, I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be amazing. And it was. So I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you to you and Vita. Like, this book would not be what it is without both of you. And I learned so much professionally, for sure, very important, but also personally, just the level of honesty and vulnerability that we would have on our calls, and the space you hold for us not having to do this perfectly. You were so helpful in making sure that I wasn't striving for that, which was really hard doing this work, writing your first book about this work. There's so much to say. I'm joking, I'm like, this book could have been like Obama's. It could have been 800 pages, part 1, with a second book to come out, right? That would have been daunting. And you just were so helpful in so many ways. One of the most poignant ones for me was that that's not your work. That's not your job to explain it all from the beginning to end, or to have to over-explain yourself or your work. That's like part of our trauma response as Black women, is to be like, here's my whole, and lawyer mind, here's my whole case. And that's writing to the white gaze, because it's like, well, we know what they're gonna say, so let me like preemptively deal with all this stuff and try to prevent harm to myself, but also causing myself harm by doing all this extra labor in advance and not getting to my point or the point I really want to get to, because I'm just too busy trying to pander to whiteness and white fragility, well, white wildness as I call it. So that really rooted me. And also just the fulsomeness of the intersectionality that I was trying to bring to this book was so important to me. When we talk about dismantling white supremacy, when we talk about racial justice, when we talk about anti-oppression work, we really talk about anti-oppression in all its forms. And when I talk about racial justice and dismantling white supremacy, I'm talking about ending all forms of oppression. And we can't end one without ending the other. And I know I hold privileges, being a cis woman, being light-skinned, being Canadian, being non-disabled, being financially secure, being thin, like all of these privileges. And so there's going to be a lot of ways in which I can cause harm. And I so appreciated you bringing those to light for me. It was a real experience in seeing, especially the ableism I noticed. It was a lot. I was like, wow. So I was so appreciative of that, of all of it. But just the grace in moving through that work and being able to really dive deep in it. There was there was ableism, and there was a really poignant conversation that you and me had about fat phobia, especially in the Black community, and how that gets medicalized and used as, violence, turns into violence and harm being inflicted. And I heard you, but also was like, I really wanted to like bring forth what was coming up for me, because I was like, this is so ingrained, so I'm having a hard time.
Yeah.
And that was just such a gift to be able to walk through that with both of you, and for you to like just support me in honoring, like, you know, this is so ingrained and this is where that's coming from, or where I think that's coming from. And then I don't want to say you get to the other side, but when you get to walk through those things with such grace, then it's just, I don't want to say it's easier either, because that's not true, but it allowed it to settle in my body more fulsomely, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So thank you.
For sure. I was taking notes because I do that when you talk, so I can, like, because there's so many things I'm like, oh yes, I want to talk about that as well. But that part around the white gaze and that perfectionism, by virtue of me being on a call with you, you know, in this case, right, within the context of being an editor, by virtue of me being on the call with you and saying, hey, Rachel, your job is not to be perfect. Your job is also not to be harmless, because there's no such thing as a harmless person. Mm-hmm. And by virtue of me being able to share that with you, I get to say it to me.
Right.
And I get to remind myself also as a Black person, right, who also has internalized a lot of that white supremacy culture, a lot of that whiteness. Hey, actually, your job in life is not to show up and to pretend to be perfect. And your job in life is not to burn the candle sort of at both ends, so that you can prove that you were good enough. That is not your job.
Yeah. And when I was thinking before we got on about, you know, boundaries and becoming unfuckwithable, like that is a pinnacle of that work. Like that is a boundary to set that was really important to be set for me as a writer, writing this book. Like, what is my actual purpose? What am I actually trying to do? And then knowing that you're going to get caught up in it, because this is so ingrained. We have been conditioned from the get, as were our ancestors, to operate as mules and mammies, really. Yeah. And so to set that boundary is uncomfortable and challenging and freeing and liberating at the same time.
Yeah. And I'm so happy that you brought that up, that boundaries piece, because, right, you're talking about setting these boundaries with this internalization of whiteness, with the systems of white supremacy. So can you tell me about some other boundaries that you were potentially setting with yourself and others as you were writing about your life, writing about your relationships, and writing this revolutionary guide for people?
Yeah, I mean, this was like an exorcism in many ways. So in order to, you know, I ripped my heart out of my chest and put it on a page and like picked out the pieces that needed to be picked so that they could be of support to others and myself. It was a catharsis. But to do that, that's a deeply spiritual process, and one that requires a lot of soul care, a lot of like creating containers. You know, when I first started writing, I like my book proposal, even I would like write these really traumatic experiences and then just like go off and do something. And then like a day or two later, like break down and be like, what's happening? This is so weird. And then I learned I had to I had to go about this as though it were a ritual, because it is. Yeah. So I had to be very conscientious about, for me, my writing time is like 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., which I am not a night person. So like, that's not when I would want to be working, but I needed the world to be asleep. I needed it to be quiet so I could commune with my ancestors, because this book came out of me. I was a conduit for my ancestors. It's equally mine and theirs. And so I could quiet my mind to do that. I mean, I was also writing this in downtown Toronto, like on Queen Street West. It was like very hectic and not ideal writing conditions. So I needed it to be quiet. And I needed to like have my candles lit. Like there's just certain things I needed to do to foster and understand that this isn't just a working day. We're not writing emails to people. We are doing deep, deep spiritual, cathartic, healing trauma work. And then after, I needed to make sure that I filled my cup up. So I tried my best not to like write 2 days in a row. You know, I was a zombie for a bit, because I would be up till 4, 5, 6 a.m. sleeping in the day till like noon, 1, and then that Black woman femme mentality came up of like, it's noon, you need to get up, you're being lazy. So like fighting with that. and just doing my best to nourish myself as much as I possibly could. It was kind of similar to after my mother died. Like when the question was sort of like, if I'm not going to take care of myself now, when will I? That was how I felt about writing the book. And that's how I feel now in having the book out in the world energetically. Like, it's so easy for us to say like, but I'm not doing a lot, you know, like my day isn't full, but energetically there's so much happening for all of us right now. There's so much happening. And so to have boundaries around that, I didn't do it perfectly. It's not possible. I didn't do even very well a lot of the time, but I learned a lot and I did the best that I could. And I really just, it was a process of going inward in a really deep way, deeper than I ever have. And so I had to really honor that in order for it to be the book that I wanted it to be. The book could have been all kinds of things. But for it to be what I wanted it to be, it required me to get really still and quiet and listen and allow things to come up and then process them. You know, I uncovered a lot of familial trauma in writing this book, like a lot that I'm still processing.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that needed time and space, still needs time and space. So that's an ongoing exercise.
Yeah. And I know that there was something that you just said, and I wrote it down, where you talked about, you know, you said, I ripped my heart out and I put it on the page. And the first time that I read the book, I felt that. And there were times when I cringed when I read it. And it wasn't because I was cringing at what you were writing. I wasn't cringing at you, but I was cringing because it was a mirror. Mm-hmm. So by virtue of you being so honest and so open about your life, and so open about the ways in which you could offer very concrete examples of how you have actualized not only the fight against white supremacy, but then also what it means to heal from white supremacy, for me, was so compelling and was so powerful. So when I read it, I felt that for sure, which is one of the reasons why I wrote that down. And then also where you talked about during this time, right? We're living in a global pandemic, which I get on calls and I remind people of that. We're living in a global pandemic.
Yeah.
You know, this is not, we're not attempting to sort of force people into these boxes as if that's not happening. Yeah. And it's important that we offer not only ourselves, but each other as much grace as possible. So leading into that, I have another question for you. And that is, how are you embodying your boundaries in this trying ass season that we living in? I think that was even one of the questions you wrote down. So I love that.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I talk about this in my work, but you know, like our there's no light without shadow, and there's no shadow without light. Yeah. I think we're really in a container where we're learning to hold both and have an understanding of sort of the importance of both, of the usefulness, the information we receive from both. 2020 was pretty dark in a lot of ways, tough year. Energetically, I don't really feel like 2021 feels that different. Mm-hmm. And that was really, really challenging in many, many ways. And at the same time, it really taught me that the boundary work has been profound. And unfortunately for me, a lot of my boundary work comes out of crisis. You know, when I talk to my amazing Black trauma therapist and she's like, and how did you get there? I'm like, total crisis. I got to setting that boundary because the darkness was going to consume me. I got to setting that boundary because I couldn't live with myself if I continued in another way. And so what I'm really coming to in this season is learning how to set those boundaries firmer and sooner so that I don't have to set boundaries out of crisis or because of crisis, which isn't to take away, still honor myself that people get to crisis and still don't set boundaries. So I want to honor where I get to with that, but still do my best to be able to do it without getting so far down the rabbit hole. Yeah. And so my word for 2021 is embodiment. And I don't always have a word for the year, but it was important to me this year, I felt, to have that word embodiment, because I've been doing a lot of work around nonviolent communication, specifically as a queer Black human. And what I've learned is, when we behave violently, when we act violently and cause harm, a lot of times it's because we weren't actually in our bodies. And so there's been harms that have been trespassed against us over and over, and we weren't even registering them for ourselves. And then all of those harms can come sort of like a wave or like a ton of bricks, and then we can operate violently, you know, whether it's through action or inaction or words or whatever it is. And so I'm really learning, like, okay, got it. So part of my work is to stay in my body. And again, as a Black queer person, that can be incredibly painful.
Yeah.
You know, and that in the year 2020, that was incredibly painful to really be with this white supremacist world, this heteropatriarchal, capitalist, trifling ass world, which we have been in, you know, for centuries, as have our ancestors. But then we have to be with that, not just the harm that I've endured, but that my ancestors have endured, and like the relentlessness of it. But learning to increase my capacity, which I talk about in the book, for the full spectrum of our human emotions, and to do the work that's required so that I have crutches, so that I am better equipped to withstand that discomfort, so that I can stay in my body. One of the things I recently learned is that I will leave my body. I've learned to leave my body as a Black woman to essentially figure out how other people are receiving me, because we're so misconstrued. We're so flagrantly misconstrued. And again, with an intention, a goal to like minimize harm to myself. How is this person perceiving me, or what is it they need from me, so that, or how do I need to operate so that I can be understood in my actions or behaviors? And ultimately, I'm seeking connection, right? Like, I want to be understood by this person and affirmed by this person. And when I'm not affirmed by this person or understood, or then there's a disconnection, and that is harmful to me. And so what I didn't fulsomely understand is the ways in which I leave my body to accommodate other people, often whiteness or non-Black people, white people or non-Black people, because they have a specific anti-Black way of perceiving me and misconstruing me, my reactions. And I do that work like before we're in conversation, during conversation, after conversation, like it never really ends, and it requires so much of me, and it's an impossible task. I set myself up to fail because I'm trying to, I'm totally appeasing to white supremacy subconsciously, and I'm trying to adjust how I'm being perceived by another human, which is not possible. Yeah. I can't claim that. I can't shift that for anyone. But we are conditioned to do that for our own survival, for good reason. It's not just like some ego trip. It's like, I want that raise. I don't want to be pulled over by this cop or end up like Sandra Bland. Like, I have to leave my body, figure out what's actually going on for this person, so I know how I need to be in this situation for my own well-being, my safety, my life, my livelihood. And I can say I have come to a place of understanding that I have enough power and privilege to know that I'm sufficiently safe in most situations I'm in, so I don't have to do that. Yeah. But that was a recent realization, and that took a lot to be able to get there, and fully acknowledging the power and privilege that I have to be able to be sufficiently safe in knowing that I don't have to do that, and how many of us are not. Yeah. So those are boundaries. Like, I get to show up. I'm doing my best to show up as Rachel in all situations, all the time. White people get to show up as white people all day long. They get to show up as themselves till the cows come home, and they don't even know it. They don't even know what a privilege that is, to just be able to just be myself without constantly having to understand how I'm being perceived, and how exhausting that is, and how harmful it is.
Yeah, definitely. I think that I once had an ex who used to call that experience with that sort of leaving our bodies as an expression of preservation, of self-preservation. She used to call it the joyful lament. Mm-hmm. So the joyful, because there's that actual appreciation and gratitude for Blackness and that love of being Black. Yeah. And then the lament, because we're so often forced into situations where we're conditioned to believe that we have to, and in some cases we do, have to abandon the Blackness in order to be safe.
Yes. Yeah. So my biggest boundary right now is being myself.
Yeah.
as authentically me in all situations, even though there are repercussions to that. Yeah. I have enough power and privilege to be sufficiently safe. There's still absolutely, there will be repercussions to this book by me continuing to show up as myself. There already has been.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely.
How about you? Because I love you and you talk about boundaries all
I do. I talk about boundaries, sun up, sundown. I love it. So how am I embodying my boundaries? I think that I am refusing to make others comfortable. Yeah. That I recognize that that's not my lot in life. So it's that rejection of making others comfortable. So in times when I'm saying things that are difficult, which tends to be a lot of the time, and I think both of you and I can relate to that, but it tends to be a lot of the time, it's that refusal to lean into the, aren't you going to make me comfortable, McKensie? You're telling me that I've done something that's harmful. Aren't you going to make me comfortable, McKensie? You've told me that I have said something that is anti-Black, right? Or something that is transphobic, something that's homophobic, that's ableist. And when my response is, no, I'm not. That's actually not my job. And that's actually not your job right now either. Your job is not to be comfortable. Your job is to be uncomfortable. Your job is to, be embracing the fact that you've caused harm, and also to be thinking about the ways in which you have been internalized to believe that your privilege and your convenience and your comfort needs to be sort of 24/7, everyone else's priority.
Right.
And that just makes no sense.
And that to me is like my supreme definition of white supremacy. When people are like, of course, this does not just apply to white people, but when we are talking about white people, that to me is the epitome of white supremacy. Your expectation that your comfort and well-being are supreme to mine, and they come at the expense of mine, and you don't care. But you don't even have to think about it. But you do have a deep and ingrained, conditioned expectation that you should be comfortable at all times, and that we have no right to make you uncomfortable. How dare we?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to go in one direction, but I see we have some limited time. So I think instead of that, what I'm going to do is I thank you for asking me. I really appreciate that. And then for the audience, I want the audience to guess who said this. And it says, when you get an invitation to do better, you take it. Right. And of course, that is Rachel Ricketts. So a question that I have for you as a follow-up is, who is this book for? Do Better. Who is Do Better for, and why?
Yeah. So it's written to predominantly cis white women. Yeah. And I say this in the book, I didn't want to write a book to white folks, because every book is written to white folks, irrespective of who the author is, generally speaking. Again, even if people intend for that book to be to whiteness or not, there's that white gaze that Toni Morrison so aptly proclaimed, it's there all the time. And I've put books down for Black authors and been like, who is that for? Because I don't think that's for me. And so I didn't want to do it. I thought it was potentially hypocritical or antithetical to the movement. And then when I really thought about my work and my purpose, it became very clear to me that it had to be written to white women, specifically cis white women, because they're causing the most harm. It caused me the most harm, and many other Black women plus folks in this work are not that I know. And because of the Eurocentric white supremacist ideals of femininity, of womanhood, which is meek and innocent and good and quiet, they have a misunderstanding of the absolute entrenchment in white supremacy. Their absolute entrenchment in white supremacy, in the ways in which they perpetuate and cause harm all day, every day, and benefit from these systems. So that was really important to me. But the book is absolutely for Black, Indigenous, and women of color, very specifically queer and trans, Black and Indigenous women, femmes, femme passing folks. Because I wrote this to cis white women so that they get their shit together, so that they can stop causing us so much harm, so that we can be healed, so that we can be liberated, so that we can be free, so that we can rest. My big goal is McKensie, you and I are talking about this on a call with Mary Majai once, we were just I'm gonna lie on the beach, just lie there and stare it out the ocean. That is right. I'm lying here conscientiously and intentionally taking time off from all of this labor I have to do, but I know that all this oppression is happening while I'm lying here. Like, to be able to just like really be there without feeling like the world's on fire. Everyone else who looks like us is being harmed while we are lying there. So that's really important. That's not to say that we can't find freedom without whiteness. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I am saying we all live under these systems of oppression. Yeah. And until we're all involved in dismantling the systems of oppression, then like shit ain't gonna change. We've been in these systems for hundreds of years, for centuries. So when it comes to white supremacy specifically, I need white folks to take up that work, and I need white women, specifically cis white women, to really understand the ways in which they're involved and the work that they need to do. But there's work for all of us to do, because this is intersectional anti-oppression work. So we all have some level of power and privilege that we need to address and acknowledge the harm we've caused, mitigate that harm, rectify that harm, cause less harm moving forward.
Yeah. Wow, you just said so many things. There's someone in the comments, Destiny, commented, "This is a masterclass." I completely agree. I completely agree. And so I really appreciate this distinction. So this book, Do Better, Spiritual Activism for Fighting and Healing from White Supremacy, is written to cis white women, but it is for us.
Yes.
It's for us. Wow. And then also this other point that I really appreciate, where you had just said something along the lines of, can we find freedom without whiteness? And the answer is, of course, yes. But can white people find freedom without us? No.
They can't even define who they are without us.
Yeah.
There's no whiteness without blackness. They don't even know who they are.
Because their definition of self is the oppression of Black, Indigenous, right, Asian, other people of color.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't even know that.
Yeah.
They don't even know it. I talk about this in the book, like doing the work, whether you do the work we do or not, for our own survival, we know whiteness better than white people will ever begin to understand whiteness, just like trans folks will understand gender identity better than cis folks ever can. Like, when you are under the foot of oppression, for your own survival, you have to understand that oppression better than your oppressor so that you can survive.
Yeah, for sure. When I'm sort of working with our clients at MMG, I find myself explaining this often, where something will happen and I say, okay, that's what that is. And then a white person, often a white woman, will say, well, you don't know that. You haven't been here. You don't know that person. You can't say that. And I have to say, yes, I do know that. Yes. And I mean, I know that physically, mentally, emotionally, metaphysically, yes, right? Spiritually. I know that because I've had to study it from every single direction over and over and over and over again.
From before you were born.
Right. True. Before I was born. So yeah, I do know it. You don't know it.
No.
We're not the same.
No.
So I think, I thank you so much for even sharing these gems. And I want to say to everybody in the audience, I mean, can you imagine all the things that you're going to read in the book? If this is what the conversation that we're having right now, it's only been 39 minutes. Can you imagine? So what I want to sort of move on to discussing is, when I talked about when I had read your book as I was editing it, some months ago, and the part of the book that for me was a part of the book where I don't think I had ever shared this with you, because at the time I wanted you to just focus on you and I wanted you to focus on your process. But chapter 5, Inheriting Mama Trauma. When I read this part of the book, when I tell you I cried, like I cried and cried. And then I thought, when I get on this call with Rachel, I'm not going to tell Rachel that I cried, because I want this process to be about Rachel. But I will tell her after it come out, though. I cried. And for me, what was so especially moving about this work, the whole book is moving and amazing to read. But what's especially moving about this work was when you talked specifically about your mom. And so I think as we are sort of rounding this out, before I ask you one last question after this one, is I'd like to know, for you, what did it mean to write so honestly and in such a raw way about the relationship between you and your mother, and about the ways in which you two as Black women, were experiencing systemic racism at that time?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's interesting. I really dislike the word interesting. But it was, a process without question, but I so appreciate you saying that, and I'm learning to receive more. So thank you, and I received that. And I didn't know how to write it any other way. I think partially because that was part of my exorcism and my catharsis. And when I years ago first thought about writing a book, it was about grief. And so it was mostly about her, but it was also about not just grief from death. This book is about grief too. Racial justice, white supremacy is about grief. I say that very explicitly in the book. And it was doing her, I think really it was if she had to endure that and I had to endure that with her, that has to be for something, because it was beyond. The story that I share in the book is the tip of the iceberg. Like I said, this book could have been 1,000 pages. Yeah. I could write a whole book just about her and our experiences and things that I uncovered even in the process of writing this book. I just felt I wrote this book and I do the work I do and I say the things I say because my mom didn't feel like she had the voice to be able to speak her truth, which, and I talk about this in the book, is part of how it manifested as physical dis-ease in her body, which is not to victim blame her at all. But when you are oppressed and traumatized over and over and over and carrying intergenerational trauma in your body and don't feel like you can release that because it's not sufficiently safe for you to, that's stored in our bodies, And so it was unsurprising to me that she wound up chronically ill, disabled as a quadriplegic who couldn't move, literally paralyzed by the amount of oppression, discrimination, othering, ostracization, trauma, period, she had to endure. And I only know not a half of it, of what she went through. Yeah. And so I do this work because I am, her legacy, because I want to be able to put words to what our experience was for her, because she never felt sufficiently safe to be able to do so. And most importantly, because I don't want anyone else to ever have to endure the shit we went through. I really don't. And I know that people are, and worse off than we were in this moment. And it's not okay. It's absolutely unacceptable. So that was so important to me. It was also really important to me for people to have, everyone who reads the book, to have an understanding of the real consequences of racial injustice and white supremacy. These are not buzzwords. This is not a moment. This is not academic or analytical. This is people's lived fucking experience, and it's harrowing, and it's heinous, and it's fucking unacceptable, and it's killing us in every way, shape, and form. It is killing us. So I needed people to really have an understanding of what the fuck that is and what that looks like, so that you can use that to call yourself into action to create change, especially those who have the most power and privilege, because y'all have not been doing shit. And you need to do a lot more and a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that, for me, and even in reading it, I felt, like what you just sort of shared, I felt like this is a book that has been written for me. Yeah. And even especially with that chapter too, what I appreciate about it as well is I find that often for Black, when it comes to Black people specifically, there's this sort of push to attempt to exoticize our trauma, or to attempt to pedestal our trauma as a means of proving just how strong we are, how worthy we are, And when I read this, I didn't get any of that. What I did get though was a lot of sort of deep feeling around, even though I know in terms of the ways in which you approach writing the book and the activities and everything else, I think this part of the book probably for me was one of the most impactful. It had me thinking a lot, even about my own sort of relationship with my mother and my own sort of relationship, specifically the relationship that I've been forced to engage in with white supremacy. But then in addition to that, it took me a step further, which I find that we're talking a lot, or we find now there are a lot of folks talking about what it means to fight white supremacy. But then what it means to heal from it is one of those conversations that we haven't yet, as a society and as a community of Black folks, we haven't yet gotten into. But the way that in which you're sort of kicking that door open, which is what Rachel Ricketts does, and I'm sure anybody else who follows Rachel Ricketts online, you didn't see that as well, you know. But for me, that is just so powerful, so powerful.
Thank you. I want to ask you a question, because this was so one of our many conversations that just I left feeling so nourished and also like transformed, was when you Vita, myself, and you were on another call, and you said, you know, I was saying something about, and I think it was around the chapter with my mom, when I was saying something about like we had to endure this, and you were like, did you have to, or were you forced to?
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if you can expand on that quickly for people watching, because that was a total mind shift for me. Yeah,
of course. I find that I had a conversation about this with one of my friends some months ago, because there was some sort of an experience that someone had. And they were comforting the person, and they said something like, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. And I said, well, can we pause and maybe take some space from what you've just shared? And can we emphasize the fact that right now you're saying this person experienced harm, and that they had to experience that harm? And maybe the ways in which it's coming out of you, you know, in a conscious way, you're not saying it in that way, but unconsciously that's something that is being expressed. But what does it mean to have to endure systemic racism? What does it mean to have to endure poverty, to have to endure ableism, right? What does it mean to have to endure sizeism? And I think what it means is that it then puts some sort of an impetus on the endurance and on the resilience. And I think it takes away from the fact that we're living within very capitalist, white supremacist, patriarchal systems that actually are forcing us into situations that if we had the choice, we would never have chosen for ourselves. So that responsibility does not lie with us, and that is not a bag that is for us to carry in any way.
Thank you. That, I just remember that being like, wow. And also what I'm hearing as you say that is like that, you know, that Black saying, like, it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's that like, well,
yeah, exactly.
Like, it's what it is. It's like, it is, it don't have to be like this. And it's this way for a very specific reason. And I think the way you reframe that around being forced to is like, oh, wait, then you have to ask the question, like, who's forcing and why?
Yeah.
Like, you give the bag back and you're like, why did you make that bag, and why are you making me carry it? Instead of us just being like, that's our load, that's our cross to bear. Like, it is what it is.
Exactly. And for me, I see myself, and I see, you know, and I won't put any sort of labels on you, Rachel. I know you will stop me if you think this is like, no, that's not my label, girl. But for me, I see us both as being warriors for our community, for our communities, plural. And I think that sort of in being in that kind of a role, especially in community with folks that have been so beat down by white supremacy, that they do get into that place where, because they're forced into that place of, for example, it is what it is, that I've found myself individually. And I've also seen you, I've witnessed this personally, you being one of those folks that is like, hey, you know what? I completely understand if you can't give that bag back, I will do it for you. Until you're able to muster up the strength, until you're able to heal in such a way where you can do it for yourself. But I will hold that vision for you. I will hold that vision for you. So I appreciate that. I mean, I just have one last question for you, because I know people have questions. So please feel free. You don't have to ask this back to me, because I know we just have the 10 minutes coming up. But what does an unfuckwittable day look like for you?
Yeah, well, I was actually just going to carry off of what you just said. So I appreciate you labeling me a warrior. And it's a label I used for myself for a long time. And it's actually part of my identity reshifting, I would say, around in 2021, really having this understanding of like, I'm actually done being the warrior. I'm very tired. I'm very tired. And this isn't to say this isn't like warrior energy, it's different. But for me, it's like, I want to embody the vision that I've been striving towards, like what I've been on the battleground fighting for. I just want to be it. And support us in getting there by showing us that it's possible. And that, my own oppression stopped me from doing that for so long, because there's guilt and grief and shame and like all kinds of shit packed into that. Like, who am I to let the bag go? Who am I to not carry other people's bags? That's a huge bag. Like, girl, you don't have to carry other people's bags. And am I helping everyone else by carrying these bags? If these bags are nearly killing me, how am I helping anyone? Which is not to say that like that's what's required of being a warrior, but I've absolutely identified as one, and I'm now really being like, I'll just be over here sleeping. I'm gonna show you what's possible, and I'm gonna show you what's possible when I'm rested.
Yeah.
I'm gonna show you what's possible when we speak our truth, when we subvert these systems that are constantly forcing us into these systems of oppression. Like, I can do this work in a way that doesn't require me to be on the battleground, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, I can be back at camp, like, here's how I suggest you do this, or we do this, right? Without needing to be on the front lines. And we need all sorts of folks doing all kinds of things, but I'm really like, I've done frontline for decades. To girls tired, been tired. And now this new level for me, I think that's part of also like releasing the book out in the world. Like, great, y'all can go read this while I'm I'm so fucking tired. And I'm tired of being tired. I'm tired of that being a narrative that I have and that other Black women, femmes, gender nonconforming folks have. I'm so over it. So my unfuckwithableness in these streets in this season is fiercely caring for myself, saying no a lot. Like, you wanna share space or energy with me? I mean, good luck. Because it's going to take a lot. I really need to be caring for myself in a major way. Even in this book launch of like putting this book out in the world and under white supremacist, capitalist, heteropatriarchal systems, it's like, well, you got to do all the press. You got to get, this is your one chance, and anything that anyone wants from you, you have to say yes, because that's what's required of being being a best-selling author, or doing what's required to have the typical standards of success. And I'm like, is it?
Yeah.
Have we questioned that at all? Have we? Like, I think it's actually quite possible to be wildly successful in my own definition and in the status quo definition of success, while fiercely caring for myself, while saying no, while not pandering to whiteness, caring for myself. Is that easy? Absolutely not. Very, very hard. Are there repercussions for wanting to do it that way? Absolutely. Do I still think it's possible? Yes, that's the vision that I hold for the world. And so that's a vision that I hold for myself. And I want to be the things I hope to see. So that's my unfuckableness at the moment.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I know that now we have some minutes left for folks who might want to ask questions. So please feel free to begin sort of sharing your questions. We'll pick out a few, we'll respond to them, and then we'll go from there.
While folks are asking questions, McKensie, do you want to share what unfuckwitableness is for you in this?
Yeah, sure. I think that unfuckwitableness for me is waking up and feeling like the only things that I have to hold are things that very uniquely and specifically have to do with me. Because I wake up a lot of days and I'm like, oh, this and this person and this person and that person and this person needs me and that person needs me and this other person needs me. Yeah. So for me, unfuckwitableness is, you know what? I need me. I need me. And I can't really do the kind of work that I would love to do in our communities if I'm not showing up for myself first. Yeah. And if I'm not showing up for myself in ways that are really gonna bring about healing and care and repair and accountability, right? And if I'm not doing that, then I know I can't really do any of these other things that I have on my list of things that I really want to do, that I really want to accomplish with this life that I have, this life that I hold. So for me, that would be one of the ways I, define unfuckwitableness, for sure.
I appreciate that and totally relate to that holding, like the amount we hold, that mental load of like caring for others. And even I was meditating this morning, I was like, this, I need to do this, this person needs this. And then I get frustrated because I'm like, this is your time, girl. It's supposed to be literally, it's like 6 a.m. You woke up early, so it'd be quiet, so you could just like, so I just so appreciate you.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate your pushback. You're like, child, I ain't no damn warrior. I'm done with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's new to me. And so it's, you know, trying it on. And also like, that's a boundary too, is just allowing myself that freedom to be able to change, to shift and be like, yeah, that identity isn't suiting. That's not fitting for me anymore. I'm gonna take that off and try something else.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So I'm looking to see what questions we might have. And let's see. Okay, so here's a question. Was there anything that surprised you throughout the process of writing the book? Anything you didn't expect to encounter as the book was developing?
I actually think some of my biggest surprises came through my work with you. Again, I was blown away at the amount of ableism in my writing. That was I shocked myself. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
So you can still make mistakes for sure, but and I think also what we've talked about is that just taking that burden off of myself of needing to do this perfectly and wanting to write a book that's about mitigating harm, but also acknowledging that there's no way that there's no possible way for me to have written this book without causing harm also and getting it wrong. It's somewhere, and I say that, and that was freeing for me to start off. Like, I haven't done this perfectly. That can't be the expectation. I have caused harm.
Yeah. Somewhere
in the book. I can't go through all of this and do all this as in-depthly as I have and not get it wrong somewhere or cause harm to somebody. And that doesn't mean, okay, I've made that statement and so I'm off the hook at all, right? But it's like allowing myself to just be with that and know that I'll trust myself to address that properly when that comes to light. I think that was probably the biggest piece. I also think just the way that the deep connection that I had with my ancestors as I wrote it, which I can't really speak about. It wasn't something I was necessarily conscientiously trying to do, but like, but they came to me all hours of the night, usually in the dead of the night, with all kinds of things like to flow out of me to put into the book. And so that, to be honest, there's people like, oh yeah, chapter 12. I'm like, what was that chapter? I don't know. I wrote this whole book and it's an exercise. It's out of me now and it's beyond, you know, like I don't actually know the minutia of what I wrote. Sometimes I read parts, I'm like, that is good. Damn, that is so great.
Yes, that happens to me too.
Yeah, because I channeled it. Yeah.
So thank you to that person that asked that question. I know we're coming up on the hour. Rachel, do you have a hard stop at the hour? Because I want to be sure I'm respecting your time.
Yeah, no, if there's another question, I'm happy to answer.
Okay. So I'm looking, I don't see another question that we have yet. So I want to remind folks that the book that we're talking about is Do Better, Spiritual Activism for Fighting and Healing from White Supremacy. If you see at the bottom of your screen, there is a Buy Do Better link there. So please feel free to click on it. If you have not gotten this book, come on now and buy this book. And then for those folks that may sort of like to sort of frequent libraries, call your library and ask them if they have this book, you know, and if they don't, tell them they need to buy it so that people can borrow it so that you can borrow it. Thank you so much, Rachel, for this conversation and for being here. I always sort of I just really, really enjoy being able to talk to you. I miss you also. So this was great to just be able to get on a call with you and talk to you. But it's been so amazing to see you sort of as you went through the process of writing this book and then our editing process. And I am just so happy for you. I celebrate you. I celebrate your ancestors. And thank you for being here. And then I think that we have one last question. I don't know if you all want me to ask this or if we're going to sort of close up here.
If you have the time to get into the last question.
I see this question from Tamika that I would love to answer.
Okay. Go for it.
how would you invite Black women to read this book since it was written for white cis women? So thank you for asking that question to me, because this was a point that I wanted to explicitly share that I didn't really get to. So it is written to white cis women, but it is for us. And when I say that, I mean, I made sure to write this book in a way that wasn't you reading it as like a bystander or on the sidelines. Like I absolutely am talking very directly to you, because we all have work that we also need to do. So part of that is in parts of the book, you get to sit back and eat your popcorn as I really read White Women for Filth, which is very enjoyable. And can bring up a lot of emotions. I think that's my hope. And then there are parts where I'm very specifically like, there's a whole chapter on unearthing our internalized oppression. There's a whole chapter on becoming unfuckwithable, which is very specific. I mean, obviously it's for everyone. It's not obvious. It's for everyone, but very specifically for Black, Indigenous women of color, very specifically Black, Indigenous women and femmes. All of the exercises, it's not like, to the white person, to the Black, Indigenous, and women of color. Like I wanted to do my best to make this work. That's one of the gifts I think I have that I do in my workshops and my work, is like the ways in which I'm able to pose questions and share stories that are accessible and impactful for everybody. That's a gift that comes from growing up in really wealthy white spaces that were deeply traumatizing to me. But my hope is absolutely that you read this and you take so much from it. And that was also very important to me, why it was so important to me for this book to be based in my personal story, because when you read my story, my hope also is that you feel affirmed, that you have an understanding of the ways, one, we also perpetuate white supremacy, right, as non-white people, in the same way like men and masculine folks will perpetuate, or in the same way women, femmes and femme-passing folks will perpetuate heteropatriarchy in spaces without men. Like we absolutely internalize this and cause each other harm, you know? Let's talk about colorism for a hot second. And just be able to have an understanding based on my lived experience of just feeling acknowledged. Yeah, that's my deep hope.
Well, thank you both so much. That was such a great conversation. I feel really motivated to do better. And I hope that everyone got as much out of it as I did. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you, McKenzie, for being here. Your voices are so what is needed right now in this new year, possibly a new shot. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
I wanted to also just remind everyone, or just inform everyone, that the recording of this video is going to be posted to Uncle Bobbie's YouTube channel, and there will be closed captioning available. So spread the word.
Thank you for that. Thank you to Uncle Bobbie's, and thank you, McKenzie.
You're welcome.
And thank you to everyone who's here. 173 people.
Yes.
Go out and get your copies, folks. And thanks so much for showing up.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.